So what are we gonna do today, Cousin PW?
The same thing we do every day, Melvin. Try to take over the neighborhood.
Hey y'all, Bloodwing back again today. You get 2 videos from me today, how about that? Back to bring some grumpiness to your internet and a special treat. Now, as I mentioned in my previous video today, some of you may not know I have a creepypasta channel. Now, I have not worked on it in a long time, so I'm not doing this to get you to go over and look at it. There's only like 3 videos. I have not uploaded to it in a long time because, well, life happened. I'm no longer in a situation where I have lots of time. Now the main caregiver for 4 of my grandchildren while my daughter has to work, so I just don't have the time to keep up with this and my main channel and all of that. And most of you already know that story. I'm not going to go into it. But I was proud of what little bit I was able to accomplish with it, and I thought, this being Halloween, this might be a good time for me to pick out 2 of my favorite stories that I did on that channel and put them here in a video for you here on this channel. One was one of the stories that was my personal favorites, and then the second I'm really proud of because I actually wrote it. It's a short story that I wrote and then put on the channel. So anyway, I'm not bringing you here this time to listen to me rattle on. Let's listen to a couple of creepy stories. Hopefully it's dark there where you're at by this point. You can turn out the lights and listen to it and maybe get just a few goosebumps. Anyway, thanks for coming and enjoy.
During the summer, when I was home from college, I worked with a couple of friends as a morning cleaner at the local movie theater. It was fairly new, built in the early 90s, with 3 big screen rooms, 4 mid-sized screens, and 3 small screens. My job as morning cleaner was to clean all the screening rooms during a shift that went from 4 a.m. to 10 a.m. It would take me about 20 minutes to get to work from where I lived. The theater was out in an area that was kind of out in the middle of nowhere. Before the area was renovated, we were told it was part wetland, part farmland, and the rest owned by the local nature center. The first couple of weeks that I worked there, nothing out of the ordinary happened. Typically, there would only be 2 or 3 of us working a shift. There was a lot of time spent by yourself, cleaning and listening to your iPod. Occasionally, we'd meet up with the day shift in the morning and give them a breakdown of maintenance issues that we were dealing with and other things that they'd like us to look at. One day in particular, my manager asked me if we had noticed the front doors being unlocked when we arrived in the morning. When I said no, the manager went on to tell me that customers, primarily women, were complaining about a tall, lanky man in a suit that had been following them from the theater to theater, and sometimes into the bathroom. Several times women had come to the front desk frightened out of their minds, describing a 7-foot-tall man in a black suit, complete with a bowler cap, that walked slowly after them. A few times even the police were called. Teenagers that worked the day shift referred to him as the tall man. While he primarily targeted women, occasionally a male co-worker would catch a glimpse of him, sneaking into a theater. On a couple of occasions they would pursue them, thinking it was someone trying to sneak into a movie, only to find nobody there. We had 12 theater rooms total, but Theater 5 was the worst. Nobody wanted to clean out Theater 5. When I first started, I was fairly naive about ghosts and spirits, and I didn't understand why even my boss was apprehensive about Theater 5, kept assigning me to be the one to clean it out. What made Theater 5 unique was that it sat behind the bathrooms in the lobby. So to get to the seating area, you had to walk down a long hallway before reaching the screening room. Being that far back, you were the most secluded, especially when it's 4 a.m. and the only other people in the theater that you're with are on the other side of the building. People cleaning there would complain of nosebleeds, constant headaches, and a feeling of being watched. My first supernatural experience took place here. It was a normal morning. I had just finished sweeping out the lobby, and I was taking care of the cups and other garbage in Theater 5. By routine, you go through and throw away leftover cups and popcorn before vacuuming and sweeping the area. I had my iPod on, and as I was going through throwing cups away, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was behind me. I kept turning around, even at some points taking out my earphones and shouting, "Hello?" Of course, there was nobody there. Like I said, it was a normal morning and I had no reason to suspect anything. I went about my routine. About 20 minutes later, I'm at the top back row, sweeping out garbage from under the seats when I hear footsteps. Someone running. I look down, and at the front of the theater, I catch a glimpse of a little blonde-haired boy turning the corner into the long hallway as he ran out of the theater. Immediately, I threw down my broom and chased after him. I ran down the hallway and out into the lobby, but there was no kid. I walked further into the lobby and saw my boss through the front entrance on a smoke break. "Who was that kid?" I asked. My boss, Jeff, looked at me. For a moment he was confused, but then he laughed, and I'll never forget how casually he said it. "So, you met Charlie." Charlie was another thing customers constantly complained about. On several occasions, they claimed a little blonde-haired boy was running up and down the aisles in the theater, causing all kinds of noises and ruckus during the move. Of course, it was in Theater 5 when an usher would come to apprehend the child. He would already have disappeared. The female staff affectionately named him Charlie, after his resemblance to the character in Willy Wonka. Charlie was also responsible for knocking several cans of garbage over, throwing papers around, misplacing things, and generally making being a morning cleaner a real pain in the butt. Charlie was more of a nuisance than anything. We used to theorize that he was the son of the tall man, but the two were never seen together. My only encounter with the tall man came a couple of weeks after my run-in with Charlie. I had yet to hear about him at this point. Had I known, I most likely would have quit sooner rather than later. Usually in the morning, if you're the first to arrive, it's your job to walk up into the projector rooms and turn on the lights in all theaters. This is an easy task, except the top floor with the projectors has a lot of life-size cutouts of movie characters and massive posters, and in the dark, it can be a little creepy. I had done this several times before, and since I was the first to arrive, I go about turning all the lights on. The projector area itself is dark. Typically, we'd carry a flashlight with us while going around flipping switches. That morning, I couldn't find the flashlight. We'd later find it in the garbage. Probably Charlie's fault. So I walked through the dark hallway of projectors, flipping all the switches. I had stayed up all night prior watching the Andy Griffith Show. I remember because I was whistling the theme song to myself as I walked down the corridor. Once again, I got that feeling of being watched, and something, several yards away, in the area with the projectors, overlooking the IMAX theater rooms, was staring back at me. I stopped whistling and tried to focus my eyes. It was a cardboard cutout. They were everywhere, so I kind of dismissed it and was about to flip the next switch when the cutout moved. I froze. What I thought was a cutout was actually a figure hunched over. Quietly, it was whistling the Andy Griffith's theme song, imitating me, only doing it much more slowly. Slowly, it rose up from its crouch, revealing itself to be at least 7 feet tall. It was a man. All I could see was a silhouette against the red exit sign lights and some of the projector computer monitors. It started toward me, whistling quietly. I wanted to move, but for some reason my feet were cemented in the spot, and I had cotton for a tongue. I didn't know what to do. Slowly, the tall man stepped toward me. He walked with a bit of a waddle, as if he'd had a bit of a limp in his left leg. I couldn't actually tell. He'd taken about 3 or 4 steps toward me when something caught his attention, and he turned and walked into an office down the hall. I turned back and ran down the steps and waited outside the theater until my boss and the rest of the crew arrived. I told them what had happened, and they explained to me that the tall man existed, but he wasn't going to hurt me. I didn't care. That experience alone was enough to make me put in my 2 weeks' notice.
This has to be my dumbest idea ever, Ben said to himself as he cinched his pack back up on his shoulders for the umpteenth time. The hardened desert ground crunched under his feet as he plodded along, reaching up to adjust the night vision goggles every couple of minutes. He had bought the goggles the previous day from a local army surplus store, feeling he probably overpaid a little, but he knew he really needed them. His only other alternative was a flashlight, and that would certainly get him busted. "Come at night," he said. "Park your car here and walk in," he said. "I swear if I end up in some military gulag, I'm going to kill Jack." Jack was Ben's friend that sometimes came on these explorations with Ben, often working as the cameraman. You see, Jack had one of those YouTube urban exploration channels, one which was actually quite popular. The pair explored the usual old houses, asylums, tunnels, etc. that you see on these channels. Ben and Jack always knew there was a risk of getting arrested for trespass, but this trip was on a whole other level. The Nevada nuclear test site was federal land after all, and watched by military patrols. Getting caught here was likely to bring much more than the usual slap on the wrist the local cops gave for being in a half-demolished house without permission. How did I talk myself into this one? He asked himself, and not for the first time. He thought back to how it had all started. Jack had arrived at Ben's apartment all wild-eyed and waving around a crumpled sheet of paper. Ben! Ben! Dude, we have so got to do this, Jack cried. Slow down, man. What in the heck are you talking about? That seemed to slow Jack down enough to take a deep breath and explain his excitement. Dude, we have to go here for our next video. Man, the views will be through the roof. Ben snatched the piece of crumpled paper that Jack was now offering as if it explained everything, and looked it over as Jack went on with his story. I won't bore you with the whole conversation, but it boiled down to this. The paper was a map, crudely drawn, of a portion of the Nevada test site. On it was marked where to park, what path to take to the fence, and the path to follow to avoid the patrols. Jack had been passed the paper from some guy who swore to its validity, it having come from a friend of a friend of a friend, of course. According to Jack, following this map would lead them safely into what was left of the fake town, built to test the effects of a nuclear blast near Apple II Ground Zero. This would be the urban exploration video of a lifetime. Now, even though he took risks all the time, all for the sake of YouTube views, Ben was no dummy. He knew the risk of capture by military patrol was high. Part of the site is still active, after all, and the desert at night was certainly no place for a city kid like him. And then there was this small little problem of radiation. 928 nuclear tests had been conducted there, after all. 828 of those were underground. But still. But for all his inner reservations, Jack somehow talked him into it. Jack had, however, backed out at the last minute. He said there had been a death in the family in Illinois and he had to go. "Thanks a lot, you chump," Ben had shouted as Jack pulled away, not believing the story for a minute. But the show must go on, right? So here he was, trudging across the Nevada desert, wearing night vision goggles, and waving the Geiger counter he had also bought at the surplus store from time to time. So far the levels had been what was deemed acceptable. Well, according to the website he'd looked them up on anyway. Besides, he had taken the potassium iodide pills the man at the surplus store said would protect him, as long as he did not overstay his welcome at high levels. So he'd be just fine, right? Even his reckless 20-something mind questioned this. But on he went. In his pack he had also brought plenty of bottled water, some trail mix, and extra batteries for the video camera. Said camera was in the hand not holding the Geiger counter, ready to record when he had arrived at the Apple II houses. To his surprise, the map had so far proven correct, as he had yet to see even the slightest sign of a patrol after he had passed through the small hidden hole in the fence. But the eerily quiet was beginning to unsettle him quite a bit. Surely even a desert, there are noises at night, he had thought to himself. But he shivered a second and trudged on. He stopped to look again at the crumpled makeshift map and calculated silently that he surely must be nearly at the houses. After walking a few more 100 feet, he was sure he could make out the outline of one of them. Elated, he smiled to himself and nearly sprinted in that direction. His mind was whirling with the thoughts of how popular this video would be. But after another 50 yards or so, he slid to a dead halt. There was something else. Something unexpected here. The first thing that had caught his attention was an electrical zap, followed immediately by an intense coppery smell in the air, like burning ozone. He turned his head to the right, the direction the zap had come from, and that's when he saw it and put on the brakes. In a rough circle about 10 feet in diameter, the air was shimmering, almost like a mirage. But it was night, and the temperature had long since dropped, so it couldn't be a mirage. Slowly he walked toward the shimmering air, using what caution and bravery his mind could muster. As he got within 20 feet of the phenomena, he halted, stunned. It was him. He could see himself walking towards the area, as if he was looking into some large, strange mirror. Again he mustered up his courage and walked forward. the mirror image aping his every move. He eased the night goggles up to the top of his head to get a better look, as the apparition was giving off its own ghostly glow. He stopped just 5 feet away and wondered aloud. What in the world? What the heck can cause this? I mean, a big mirror? Just out of The rest of the statement caught in his throat. It was at this point he realized he was not looking at an exact mirror image. Oh sure, that was his likeness he was looking at, but his eyes were odd. Almost totally black they were, with no whites at all. And the scene behind the image did not exactly match the scene behind himself. It was very close, sure, but not exact. The scenery behind the image was more blackened, somehow more sinister than that behind Ben. Suddenly remembering the video camera in his hand, Ben immediately brought it up to start recording this thing. But this time, the mirror Ben did not match his movements, but instead straightened up, smiled warmly, and waved as if Ben was a neighbor out for a stroll. What the? This is no mirror. But what is it? Now, Ben was no scientist by any stretch, but he'd seen enough movies and TV shows on the subject to begin putting 2 and 2 together. I bet this is some kind of mirror into another dimension, a parallel Earth. Maybe the bombs tore a hole between the two. Wrapped in his thought, Ben had walked closer to the tear, reaching up his hand as if to feel the surface of the mirror. He did not notice the smile of his doppelganger widen, nor his eyes darken. Hey, kid, step away from that. Get away now. Ben snapped his head around at the sound of the unexpected voice behind him. He saw 3 heavily armed soldiers dashing across the desert towards him, weapons raised. But before Ben could raise his hands and shout, "Don't shoot!" several pairs of arms with gnarled and seriously clawed hands shot out of the mirror, grabbing Ben and yanking him off his feet and straight into the mirror. Almost immediately the apparition closed in on itself, disappearing into the dark desert night. But not fast enough that the soldiers could not hear the pained screams of Ben, as well as the wet, gory sounds of Ben being torn apart and eaten by a dozen greedy, fanged maws. Stupid kids. Why do they keep coming here? One of the soldiers lamented. One of his compatriots bent down and picked up the camera Ben had dropped, as well as the makeshift map, which he offered to the 3rd soldier. It's another one of those maps, Sarge. We'd better take this and the camera back to post. Don't want them falling into the wrong hands. The sergeant takes the map, turns it over back and forth in his hand. Just like the others, you don't think these, whatever they are, have agents on this side sending them victims, do you? I don't want to think about that, Sarge, the first soldier replies. With a sigh of resignation and a shrug, the sergeant goes on. Well, might as well head back and get some rest. We'll have to come back early tomorrow morning. If it's like all the other times, there'll be a pile of bloody bones to clean up.